an economist at the Australia Institute. Alison, welcome.
Thank you.
So all these figures we're looking at, tomorrow is certainly, as far as GDP figures, expected to be poor. Economic conditions are weakening. Why has the Reserve Bank left rates on hold again?
I think this is a really interesting period for economic history in Australia because, by all accounts, the Reserve Bank should be cutting rates. It should be trying to juice the economy by making it cheaper to borrow. I think what we're getting at is this point where the governor of the Reserve Bank, Philip Lowe, has been very upfront to government saying we need you to engage in fiscal spending. We need bigger spending on infrastructure. We need to lift the public sector wage caps. Wages are a huge problem. So I think what this is showing, the Reserve Bank are trying to bring government to the table, I think, on meeting them halfway and playing their role in supporting economic growth.
So how do you think that's likely to play out, given that the global economic risks have been alive for a while now and look unlikely to be resolved in terms of the US-China trade war, and that household spending has been low for some time as well domestically?
I mean, consumption spending is low in Australia and household expenditure and consumption has been declining, and that is directly related to low wages. So the international overall environment, which is getting more unstable, and it definitely does draw Australia's economy into more uncertain terrain, in particular with our relationship with China. But really what the growth figures should show is that resources and mining and our exports, particularly to places like China, are responsible for a lot of the growth at the moment. It's holding the economy afloat, but it's also masking some erosion and some, I'd say, sort of some long-term trends which are unlikely to unravel. And perhaps we're seeing that unravelling at the moment as well.
So you're saying interest rates won't stimulate the economy any further. Tax cuts, we've seen those. You're saying that's not necessarily working either. So it comes down to, rather than monetary policy, financial policy as far as stimulus from the government's concerned. The government's saying, well, we're doing our bit. It's corporations and businesses that need to do their bit. And they're turning around and saying, well, hang on, isn't that your job? No one seems to be pulling those levers as such.
Yeah, and I think we've got modern governments and we have policies for a reason. And history's proven that if you allow individual employers or business and firms to act in their own interests, which they operate on a motive of increasing profits, that's why they invest. If we have an economy of individual employers acting as an aggregate, it looks a bit like what we have at the moment, which is slowing wages growth. Everyone has an interest in decreasing the wages inputs, which has an overall impact on the overall stability of the economy. I mean, you only have to think about the financial impacts because Australian households have some of the highest private debt of all the OECD countries. So
this is an imbalance you talk about in the economy at the moment.
Correct,
between what the corporations are earning and what individuals are earning.
Absolutely. I think yesterday ABS brought out some business indicators which showed this is the fourth quarter that the overall economic flows flowing to profits versus wages, which is all income, superannuation, bonuses, this is the fourth quarter that corporate profits have been much higher. And this follows an overall trend of almost 4 decades of profits being, the overall share of national income going to everyday people in their wages has been declining. And that's part of the reason why government will say we've cut taxes and, we put pressure to, to decrease interest rates. But all of those things are doing is just giving money, increasing the overall amount of money in the back pocket of business. The requirement of business to invest is what policy is about. And that's why, we built a modern economy after the war and after depression because of the need for policies to control investment and determine its direction.
What if those GDP figures out tomorrow show that Australia's economy contracted in the last quarter?
Sorry, can you repeat?
What if those GDP figures show that the economy actually contracted in the last quarter?
I mean, most economists are projecting that it'll be about 1.4% growth for the year. that would be still a huge concern, because that is a lower growth rate than even when we were during the GFC, which was 1.7% in 2007-2008. But if you look at overall economic conditions now, we're kind of moving in similar territory to that shock that we experienced in retail sales and the unemployment and the layoffs that we saw at that time. We're actually in similar territory now. What were some of the policy responses we had in that time? We had massive government stimulus, and we had some assurances that the financial system would maintain stability. So I think if we saw...
But this federal government's unlikely to do that, isn't it? Because it's so wedded to its surplus promise.
Absolutely. And that's what we've seen. In fact, because interest rates are so low, it's such a good time for government to actually be borrowing to spend on big public investments and to juice the economy.
And just briefly, curiously enough, our current account is in surplus for the first time in more than 4 decades. Yet we find ourselves in this situation where the economy is sort of on the brink.
Yes, it's a very unique time. What that means is we're an export country. We export a lot, and it's mostly stuff out of the ground. So while if we look behind the number, we actually see that revenue that comes in that gives us that surplus is only here for a small amount of time, because a lot of those that revenue ships off weeks later into dividends to foreign owners of that, mining resources in Australia. So it's not the best picture necessarily.
Alison Pennington, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
The notorious Peter